You don't lose her respect because you said the wrong thing. You lose it because early on your behavior quietly told her there were no edges to you. Most men never see the moment it happens. There's no argument, no confrontation. Just a subtle shift. How she speaks to you, how she tests you, how easily she assumes access. Respect doesn't collapse loudly. It erodes in silence when structure is missing. What you're really being measured on isn't confidence, charm, or intention. It's whether you can hold your ground without explaining yourself. Whether your life has weight without her approval. Whether your emotional center stays unmoved when pressure shows up. If you've ever felt things change without knowing why, this is where it started. And once you see this pattern, you can't unsee it. If this kind of clarity matters to you, take a moment to support it. Subscribe, leave a like, or comment so more men who need this perspective can find it. Now stay with me, because the boundary that decides everything is not the one you think, and once you understand it, the entire dynamic shifts. You are not witnessing rejection in the dramatic sense, and you are not watching attraction disappear in a single defining moment, because what is actually unfolding happens far earlier and far quieter, a subtle psychological sorting process that takes place before emotion hardens into attachment and before words begin to matter at all. In the early phase, when attention feels light and curiosity still carries momentum, she is not consciously evaluating you through the moral categories most men obsess over, because instinct does not operate through labels like confident or insecure, dominant or passive. It operates through pattern recognition, through sensing whether something holds shape under pressure or collapses when weight is applied. Every interaction becomes information, not because she is calculating in the way men imagine calculation, but because the nervous system cannot avoid noticing consistency, coherence, and self-regulation, and it records deviations automatically, without commentary or judgment. When you make yourself endlessly available, when you reshape your schedule to maintain proximity, when you explain decisions that required no defense, the signal transmits quietly, not as weakness, but as softness without structure. There is no cruelty required for this shift to occur, no intent to diminish you, no conscious desire to dominate the dynamic, because this is not about morality or manipulation, it is about gravity. Structure attracts stability, and absence of structure invites testing, the same way an unanchored object invites movement until it settles somewhere else. You begin to feel the change not as rejection, but as a subtle redistribution of weight. She interrupts more freely, questions you with less hesitation, assumes access without asking, and probes edges that were never stated because they were never embodied, while you find yourself responding instead of standing, adjusting instead of remaining still, hoping clarity will restore what presence was meant to establish. This is where most men misinterpret the moment, because they mistake articulation for authority and emotional availability for strength, believing that if they explain their values clearly enough or reassure intention convincingly enough, the balance will correct itself. But explanation does not create edges, and reassurance does not replace internal order. Edges are not declared, they are felt. They emerge through how you move through your own life without negotiation, through how your time remains ordered even when interest is present, through how your emotional state does not fluctuate in response to uncertainty or subtle pressure. When those edges are missing early, the dynamic does not become hostile, it becomes casual, and casualness is the environment where respect quietly dissolves without conflict. What you are confronting here is not a lesson about control or dominance, because both are substitutes men reach for when they lack internal steadiness, but an exposure to a deeper truth, that respect is a byproduct of coherence. When your actions align without effort, when your boundaries exist without performance, when your presence feels grounded rather than reactive, the interaction stabilizes around you naturally, without demand or force. This is why the boundary that decides everything is almost never the one men focus on, because it has nothing to do with rules placed on her and everything to do with the standards you live by before she ever has reason to test them. Stay with this, because what follows is not advice you apply mechanically. but a shift you internalize permanently. And once it settles, the pattern you have lived through more than once finally reveals its logic. You start to understand that what failed you before was never a lack of effort or care, but a quiet absence of internal friction, a life too easily rearranged, a center too easily influenced, a presence too willing to bend before it had fully set. What felt like kindness was often accommodation, and what felt like openness was sometimes the absence of containment, and the world, including the people drawn into it, responds very differently to containment than it does to availability. This is where the story shifts from observation to ownership, because the dynamic you experienced did not happen to you, it emerged from you, not as a flaw, but as an unfinished structure still learning how to carry weight. When a man has not decided where he ends and the world begins, others will sense it long before he does, not through logic, but through the way his energy moves toward resolution instead of stillness. You see now that the earliest interactions were never neutral ground. They were a testing environment, not designed to judge you, but to feel you, to sense whether your life had momentum independent of her attention, whether your time was governed by intention rather than proximity, whether your emotional state belonged to you or shifted subtly in response to hers. None of this was spoken, because it did not need to be, and none of it was cruel, because instinct rarely is. When you respond immediately to everything, you remove anticipation. When you explain choices that were already decided, you remove authority. When you tolerate subtle disrespect to preserve connection, you remove consequence. Each of these acts feels small in isolation, but together they form a pattern, one that communicates softness without depth, warmth without weight, presence without direction. The result is not rejection, but reclassification. This is the moment most men miss, because they believe attraction fades due to emotion or novelty, when in reality, it recalibrates due to structure. Without structure, curiosity has nowhere to settle, and without settlement, respect has no reason to anchor itself. What follows feels confusing only because the cause was invisible at the time it mattered most. Boundaries, in their truest form, are not lines you draw in conversation, because spoken lines can always be negotiated, challenged, or ignored. Real boundaries exist before language. They live in behavior, rhythm, and restraint, in the way you move through uncertainty without rushing to close it, in the way your schedule reflects priorities that were decided long before desire entered the room. When those boundaries are present, they do not provoke resistance, they create orientation. You notice the difference when you stop performing availability and begin embodying direction. Your time no longer expands to fill every opening. Your attention no longer floods moments that have not earned depth, and your emotional tone remains even when curiosity or tension appears. This does not make you distant, it makes you legible. People understand where they stand with men who stand somewhere themselves. What changes next is subtle but unmistakable. Testing becomes lighter, not because it disappears, but because it no longer finds leverage. Questions lose their edge, interruptions soften, assumptions retract, and the dynamic settles into a quieter rhythm, where respect no longer needs to be negotiated because it is already implied. You are no longer reacting to the interaction is orienting itself around you. This is the part few men expect, because they assume boundaries create distance, when in reality they create safety. Not comfort, but safety. The kind that allows attraction to deepen without chaos, that allows intimacy to exist without erosion. When you can walk away without resentment, when you can remain present without overinvestment, when you can hold silence without anxiety, you signal something rare, that your value is not contingent on outcome. The deepest boundary is not about saying no to her, it is about saying yes to yourself before she ever enters the equation. When your standards are pre-existing rather than reactive, when your routines are non-negotiable rather than flexible to impress, when your emotional center remains stable under ambiguity, you no longer need to defend or explain anything. Your life speaks for you. This is where the internal shift completes itself. Because you stop asking how to be perceived and start asking how to remain coherent. Attraction becomes a consequence rather than a pursuit. Respect becomes a response rather than a request. And clarity replaces effort as the primary force shaping your interactions. Nothing about you becomes louder. Everything becomes heavier. And once you feel that weight settle in, once you recognize the calm authority that comes from alignment rather than assertion, you realize that the boundary that decides everything was never external at all. It was the moment you chose to stop negotiating with uncertainty and start living from a center that does, not move simply because something desirable appears. Stay with this, because the final layer reveals how to sustain this state without rigidity or performance, and why men who internalize it never need to chase respect again. What comes last is not a technique you deploy or a posture you maintain, because anything that requires conscious effort will eventually fracture under pressure, and pressure is always the environment where truth reveals itself. What endures is a deeper orientation, a way of standing internally when outcomes are unresolved, when interest introduces ambiguity, and when silence stretches longer than comfort prefers. This is not something you switch on. It is something you become once you stop negotiating with uncertainty. Most systems fail men at this stage because they attempt to convert internal alignment into external behavior, encouraging consistency as something to display rather than something to inhabit. But displayed consistency is brittle. It survives only while conditions remain favorable, while approval flows, while attraction feels secure. The moment tension appears or validation pauses, that performance collapses, and the man returns to adjustment, explanation, and pursuit. Inhabited consistency does not collapse because it is not sustained by feedback. It is sustained by identity. You begin to notice that when your emotional center no longer depends on response, silence stops registering as threat and distance stops feeling like loss. You can remain attentive without leaning forward, present without collapsing inward, interested without surrendering pace, and this balance communicates more powerfully than assertion ever could. It tells the nervous system across from you that nothing here is urgent, that desire has not destabilized you, and that your sense of self remains intact regardless of how the interaction unfolds. This is the difference between men who feel compelling in moments and men who are respected across time. Momentary appeal feeds on chemistry, novelty, intensity, forces that spike quickly and decay just as fast. Sustained respect feeds on coherence, which deepens as circumstances shift and ambiguity increases. When uncertainty enters the dynamic, when attraction introduces unpredictability instead of reassurance, coherence holds, and holding creates gravity. At this stage, you stop trying to be understood, because you understand yourself well enough that misunderstanding no longer threatens your footing. You stop adjusting your standards based on who is watching, because your values are not contextual, they are structural. Your routines persist regardless of interest. Your emotional tone remains even regardless of outcome, and your decisions no longer require affirmation to feel legitimate. This is not emotional distance, it is emotional ownership expressed through restraint. What this produces in others is not intimidation or submission, but orientation. People know where they stand because you know where you stand, and that clarity removes the need for probing designed to locate edges. When edges are present, pressure stops escalating. When pressure stops escalating, respect stabilizes. This is not manipulation, and it does not rely on withholding. It relies on resolution. Attraction at this point no longer occupies the center of the interaction because it no longer needs to. It exists as a byproduct of presence rather than a goal pulling you forward. You can feel interest without chasing it, connection without clinging to it, and possibility without reorganizing your life around it. That freedom is not detachment, it is maturity, the capacity to remain grounded while desire moves through you instead of directing you. Men who never experience this state are not weaker or less capable. They are simply more outcome-focused, more reactive to ambiguity, and more inclined to bargain with discomfort instead of allowing it to exist. They attempt to manage dynamics externally because they have not stabilized themselves internally, and the world responds with intermittent validation rather than sustained respect. Attention may appear, but it never settles. You now see that respect is not something earned through effort or earned through compliance, but something allowed through alignment. When your actions reflect your values without announcement, when your presence feels settled rather than anticipatory, when your life continues forward without seeking permission from desire, respect becomes inevitable rather than conditional. It does not spike and vanish. It accumulates quietly, building over time without needing reinforcement. This is the final inversion most men miss, that the less you chase clarity from others, the clearer you become to them. That the less you pursue reassurance, the more stable you appear. That the less you perform strength, the more strength is assumed. None of this requires withdrawal or coldness, only the willingness to remain rooted when uncertainty invites movement. Once you live from this center, you recognize something rarely articulated, that boundaries are not defenses against loss, but expressions of self-trust. They signal that you believe in your own continuity, that your life does not collapse when outcomes shift, and that your sense of self remains intact regardless of who stays or leaves. That signal is felt immediately, even if it is never named. If this reframed something in you, it is because the pattern was already there, waiting for language. The shift does not require force or discipline in the conventional sense. It requires coherence sustained over time. And coherence, once internalized, becomes the quiet authority that reshapes every dynamic you enter without ever needing to announce itself. That is the full truth, and once it settles, you no longer wonder why respect changes early, because you are no longer giving it a reason to.